So what Stewart would always talk about is that in order to make any complex, in order to generate any complex skill, it has to come from two basic skills, right? Or in order to come up with a new movement, the brain has to recruit two basic skills to make a new movement or new skill out of. And so I set up this pyramid to kind of explain how skill development and performance works. So I just have a graph here where along the x-axis I have number of skills, and on the y-axis I have performance. So the taller the pyramid gets, that corresponds with increased performance. Actually, let's put a pause right here before we get too far into this. And let's go ahead and give students a chance, because I don't want to keep them for too long. I've already kept them for about a half hour, and they got work to do. So ladies and gentlemen, if you want to stick around about a conversation about a nerdy way of organizing training principles, you are more than welcome to stay. Lance and I are gonna have a pretty good time here talking. If you guys would like to log off, we won't take it personal. We have literally over 1,000 adoring fans on a podcast.
Let's be clear, Adam won't take it personally, I will. And I've written down all of your names. No, I'm kidding.
Good luck, guys. You're more than welcome to log off. If you want to stick around, that is totally great. Well, we'll give you guys a couple of minutes. If you're sticking around, though, I just ask you that you stick around for the long haul. That way, we're just not chiming out as we talk. All right, here we go. We're back in it. We're in it for the long haul. Let me get my presentation back up here. There we go. All right, and so what I did here is in this pyramid, I just had like really basic hammer stuff, and I just put them in here as like ways of representing the idea. And I'm not exactly sure this is that these two skills would necessarily lead to linking up the more complex one, but I try to keep it as close as I could for the hammer coaching that I do, which I generally I'm coaching hammer throwers that have never tried it before at all, and they're starting from absolute scratch. And so I have two basic skills of focus on a target, and then winding the hammer as two basic skills, and then those two basic skills can be linked up to having a throw with a direction. And so having a throw with direction is going to give you a certain amount of performance. And my thinking there is like, well, okay, you got to be able to wind the hammer around and develop some momentum in the hammer, and you have to have focus on a target if you're going to throw it in a particular direction. That's all I'm thinking with that one. And so if it takes two basic skills to make a more complex skill, then how we should be developing performance is we'd have to go if we want to make this pyramid higher, we have to go back down on the base of the pyramid and add a new basic skill, and then start linking up more skills to make a higher pyramid. And so we add one more block to the base of the pyramid, so the pyramid can go higher. And so in order to get 1 unit of performance greater, we actually have to have 3 units of skill development for that 1 unit of performance. Thoughts, Lance? So far, this is brilliant, right?
No, and as we get further along, it becomes more and more brilliant, really. The thing that I really like about, first of all, the first example is absolutely the first thing you do with a thrower, and it's a really simple way to, and I guess you could, well, not I guess, I know that you could apply it to any other sport. You just have to, you have to know the sport well enough to be able to uh, define those things, because we know hammer really well. It's super easy. Yeah, that's the first drill you do. You learn the wind, and then you say, okay, throw it out there, and it creates, and that's your first throw. And then all the rest of the stuff in the hammer is literally based on that very first skill.
Yeah,
The
that was
thing
my
that
trial for Oregon.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's
all I did. Could I throw it, the hammer with a direction? That was it. That's all Stewart had me do, and then I could come back the next day.
and so when, because you were just a raw beginner, and I think Stewart was a little bit more of a beginner so you were a raw beginner when you obviously when you got to Oregon, and Stewart had what, 98, so he had 13 15 years over here, 16 years coaching over here, coaching beginners. I got to Eugene in 85, and he didn't do that with me. He gave me a different drill that's further, it was more the walking rhythm. So he assumed either he assumed the other two, or he hadn't defined that clearly enough at the time that I came. Um, but it's always a question of, which do you teach first? Do you teach the walking rhythm first, or do you teach the wind first? And there's pluses and minuses of each one, but they both end up doing exactly what the graphic shows. And the thing that I like about the way that you did this graphic is, very early on you can see how to create, and you and I talked about it the other night, how you and I can, or how you create an integrous system, because it's obvious, it's building blocks, and you're just setting bricks. And this is what I like about this idea of the way you do it, is there's a whole bunch of examples in the world of just this.
Right. I also think this highlights more subtly. I think it highlights the importance of a coach, because you can't start stacking the pyramid this way unless you know what result you're ultimately going for.
Right.
You know, and so I could build this pyramid right now because I've gone through this coaching process, and so I know how to build this kind of tiny pyramid here. Whereas my athletes that I'm coaching won't have a clue, because they don't quite know where they're headed. And so, having a coach there to organize training organize training so that these skills get incorporated,
Right.
I think is really important, because how this model works, how I'm laying it out now, you would have to know where you're going. You'd have to know the end result.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that necessarily. And maybe it's personal, and maybe it's popular media. There was a lot of times when Stewart would come in and just go, "No, we're doing this today," and you're learning a new skill, and you're not really sure how it applies. So I don't know if the athlete needs to know. I think obviously the coach has to know,
Right. Yeah.
because there's plenty of coaches out there that just go, okay, do this exercise, and they don't have any idea why you're doing the exercise. It's just that Lance and Adam did it when they were training, but they don't know how it applies.
Yeah. Let's put it. Okay. Yeah. Because I think we could talk about it here in the next couple of slides. And so this next slide just shows we're just, if for every, so we have a pyramid built here with 4 basic skills on the base of it. So the base is 4 bricks across. The next row is 3 bricks across. The next row is 2 bricks across, and then there's 1 brick on top. So the triangle here has 4 skill bricks for the base, and it's 4 bricks tall. And so we added 1 extra basic skill, and then had to link up 4 new skills to get 1 unit of of performance out of that. So now we have a 4-to-1 ratio of skills to performance. So the better you get, the more performance you get. If you're going to improve that performance, it's actually going to take more work to get that improvement. We'll move on to the next one. Now, what I see often is athletes get impatient. As you know, I think that's their tendency. They have a goal. We had a guest speaker here on Tuesday, and they're talking about how babies learn how to walk, and that babies learn from, they have a desire to learn how to walk, and then they use the machinery that they were born with to play around with, to develop their erector spinae muscles and that sort of stuff, so to give them the ability to walk. But it's that desire to learn how to walk that the babies start exercising themselves essentially to get them to walk. And so a motivated athlete is going to want to increase their performance, and it's pretty frustrating to go all the way back to the base of the pyramid to start working at performance. And so it's really tempting just to get more performance by getting stronger and faster and throwing harder, essentially. Like just throw with more force and get it to go further. And I see that a lot, especially in like NCAA Division III, the smaller colleges. There's a lot of hammer throwers that kind of throw that way. And you know, I've talked about this a lot too, where it's, I think our way of training, I think you're probably one of the most skillful hammer thrower in history. I'll bet you your pyramid is just of skills is bigger than anybody else's. That's my guess.
Yeah, I can't argue that. I don't know for sure, but there's a lot of times when I ask people, well, have you done this? You know, trying to find an analogy for one of these skills. No, I've never done that. Well, how can you relate to this thing if you haven't had these experiences? So yeah, you're probably not too far off.
Yeah, where people just get they get the basics of the throw, and then they just get really strong and really fast.
Yeah.
So but if you do that too much, if you just rely on strength and speed too much, you end up with this really narrow pyramid with a really small base and a really tall peak on it. And you told me this term called the angle of repose.
Yeah.
Yeah. You described it better than I'm going to. What do you mean by the angle of repose?
And again, here we go with examples in real life of things being connected. So the two examples that I have learned about angle of repose, I learned the term from a hammer thrower that I coached here after you, Adam. And he was an exercise phys guy, and they were talking about training and periodization and all this stuff and overtraining. And the example, so the angle of repose is where your training curve gets so steep, I don't know them backwards, that it fails. And the example in real life that Mike, the hammer thrower, gave me was the pile of gravel, the gravel pit. You know, you're driving by on the highway here on Beltline in Eugene, but everybody's seen them if you're paying attention. There's this big conveyor belt that goes up to the top, and it's carrying gravel out of the crusher, and it's dropping it onto the gravel pile. Well, it starts out flat, and as you can tell, you know, okay, nothing's going to fall there, nothing's going to fall. Pretty soon the thing gets high enough that this slope overcome the gravity, the normal forces and all of that stuff affecting the tiny bits of gravel becomes greater than the normal force of gravity becomes greater than the stickiness of the gravel particles, and it slides down the slope, thus widening the pyramid again. And if you can go, you know, fairly infinitely, then you're just going to get this gigantic pyramid. But ultimately, the angle of the sides is going to be the same, whether once it reaches that certain point, it's going to stay the same. It's just going to slide down and build back up and slide down and build back up. But the thing that we're looking at as a training system is we want to avoid the slide down. We want to build the base of the pyramid at an equal rate to the peak. And that's why I like this graphic way of doing this, is because it shows that. The other simple example was one of the first head coach I worked for was a distance coach, and he talked about the athlete. You can't go into the competition with the tip of your pencil too sharp, because everybody knows if your tip's really sharp, the first thing that happens is you break part of it off. So you have to have a functional tip on the pencil. You have a functional place in your physiology, in your training system, that it's maybe not your best. You won't get your 100% performance, but with that 100%, there's a big chance of you failing. If you're working at 95%, it's a big chance you're going to be successful. And in the real world of coaching, that's the key, is to have your athletes compete at 90 to 95% every single time. And so, well, give me 110%. It's impossible. You can't do that. It's physically, in the world, physics, impossible to give 110%. And if you try to give 100%, you're probably going to break.
Yeah, and I think we should. And by breaking, right, or using the angle of repose, if your pyramid topples over, what that looks like in the real world is an injury, right? I mean, I think that's what we're talking about. You get hurt at that point if you try to take a hammer and throw it absolutely as hard as you can, and you don't have the skills and the technique to handle those forces. You're going to put the forces someplace on your body that can't handle them, right? I mean, is that the?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so that's why there's a big risk that comes from trying to get performance with a narrow based pyramid. There's a real risk just to the athletes, and if you get hurt, you can't perform as well anyway. And so even if you just wanted to treat athletes like I don't know, numbers or robots, there's still a risk in it, just in performance wise, right? You're going to risk bad performances because the athletes are in pain and suffering. But if you're just cold hearted about it, there's still a risk. Not to mention,
and it also creates a sort of a narrow, because you always feel like, as you're competing, you always feel like you're on this razor's edge, and it just makes that razor just a little sharper. And I don't know if we're going to get to that the flow part of this deal, but yeah, then there's a lot more anxiety if you if you know that your pyramid is steep, you're hanging out there, and that creates a problem too in competition, even just a mental thing.
Yeah. Now this slide is where I think we can probably start thinking about how do you progress when you run into a roadblock, right? What if there's a basic skill you just can't do, and I think every coach runs into this. You're trying to teach an athlete how to do something, and they just can't figure it out. They can't get it.
Yeah.
And so using this model of two basic skills, or at least two basic skills, you need to link up to make a more complex skill. If there's a skill an athlete can't get, if they can't succeed at, the coach or the athlete at this point too can think of two basic skills. They can split that more complex skill down into two more basic skills, to see if the athlete can master those two basic skills, and then try to link those up into the more complex skill. You kind of have to take literally two steps backwards to go ahead and learn that one skill that the athlete is struggling with. Thoughts?
Don't know. This is one. Yeah, as a former coach, we'll just do it. that's the attitude of some coaches. You know, for those of you that don't know the sport very well, the world record holder is a Russian, and he came over and he would do clinics, and there were clinics where all he would say in the whole clinic was push the bar, push the bar. And this is something that we had done, Adam and I, forever. That was the one of the main tenets of our training. But we had to, and we had to find, and we were helped by our coach to find many different ways to push the ball. Doesn't really matter what it means. But in your mind, you can imagine a forehand tennis shot instead of a backhand tennis shot. So, so anyway, at some point, these blocks have to just be, well, you just have to do it. There is no, like this one it's a really good example of, yes, there are associated skills, but then what if you can't do, you know, what if you can't do the Koji wall push, dorsiflexion? Well, then is there two more, and then two more, and then, you know, so how deep does the root of the pyramid is expected to go?
So I mean, ultimately, you should be able to get it down to like you know, those stages of development in that first year of life when you go from infancy to walking. I mean,
Right.
at least that's what Stewart even talked about
Yeah.
reflexes for coming out of the birth canal. The babies turn and rotate
Right.
coming out of the birth canal, and he thought that reflex had something to do with turning in the hammer. And he, you know, he never articulated it. Yeah, that's the look I gave him too. Um, but that's what he would always talk about, going back and finding these you know, these reflexes in infancy that you should be able to break everything down to that level. Which, let's
Yeah.
not think about that too much, because the pyramid analogy breaks down. Then does that means that the base of the pyramid is bigger as an infant?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't
And
want
then,
to think about that too much.
and again, we're talking, there's two things we're talking about. We're talking about performance of an individual thrower, and we're talking about a training model or a learning model.
Yeah.
And the sort of like a real world response to, at some point, these basement and sub basement squares, if you have to go, you know, two more layers down just to learn a heel turn, chances are you shouldn't be a hammer thrower.
Well, okay, so I'll push back on that one a little bit, because you know, so at the beginning when we first started talking, you said Stewart started you off on this more advanced uh, uh, hammer thing, and probably in the 13 or 15 years in between you starting and me starting, I'll bet you he worked with enough God, was it suboptimal athletes. I think that's a nice way of describing the difference between you and me. And so he probably worked with enough athletes that weren't as talented to where he went back and found more basic fundamental skills to start throwers off with. I think just by necessity. I mean, I think he just wanted to weed people out to whether they were worth training or not. You know.
Well, I know that he didn't have the 6 count when I got there.
Yeah.
We made the 6 count up. He would always talk about, you know, the gray ones. He would always, you're throwing the ball. You're not spinning and letting go, you're throwing the ball. And so that relates to a really basic throwing skill that we learn very young. Yeah. Right.
And so I think Stewart did, like, even in your time of training with them, I think he did identify certain skills that athletes would struggle with in general, and then figure out ways to split that skill into more basic skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these, you know, and everybody talks about this, all modern coaches now, kind of bemoan the loss of a population of young athletes that used to go climb trees and run and throw and wrestle with each other out in the mud, and just more active, more multi-directional skill acquirement, just because of the way we play.
Yeah.
And in a more structured way, the loss of multi-sport athletes in high school, in middle school and high school. So there's so much more specialization, and specifically to heighten the peak of the pyramid without taking the time to widen the base. You see basketball players that can't do anything else.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and to your other comment when you said if you have to go however many steps you have to go backwards in order to learn this one skill, maybe you shouldn't be a hammer thrower. I think that's true at University of Oregon. It's like if you have to, if you can't do a skip, you don't have the coordination to skip. Yeah, you probably shouldn't be trying to throw a hammer at the University of Oregon. It's just going to be too long of development. By the time you get up to being a functional hammer thrower, you've graduated, and you're at a university with like Nobel laureates as professors. Go find something better to do. Like, there's a big world out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's always going to be something. So the other one that comes to mind is the time that I was doing a clinic and we were doing the walking rhythm drills, the 6-count drills. And I made a javelin thrower puke. She couldn't spin around that many times. So that's not a skill that you can learn. That's a physical attribute that you kind of have to throw the hammer. You can't, you have to be able to go around at least 5 times without getting dizzy, or you ain't gonna throw very far.
Right.
It's gonna be a miserable life for you.
Right. And I'll bet you we could bring on other event coaches and they all have their one thing that says, yeah, I can't figure out how to make this skill any easier for people. Like for me, it's if the discus comes off the pinky instead of the index finger, I don't know how to fix that one.
Oh, that's easy.
Oh, well, now you tell. Well, we'll talk about it after. Well, you better tell me now. Like, I mean, I have some workarounds that I've tried, but I usually tell them to try the javelin.
I don't know. We don't need to talk about it now because I don't know. Maybe I've never run into it.
Yeah.
Maybe the person, I just had to say it's like squeezing a bar of soap, right? And it squishes out in between your thumb and your forefinger. Or get them to hold it like you would hold a flat rock to start with, so they learn it that it comes off the index finger. Can't do anything with it. You can throw it 10 feet because it's this gigantic disc instead of a rock. The one that I could never figure out was the shot. This one guy, he was a football player and he came out his last year. He was the boyfriend and now husband of one of my javelin throwers, but he couldn't push the shot like that. He'd always throw it like this.
Yeah, like he's shooting a free throw.
Like,
or
no,
man,
like,
he would speak. Wow.
Ole. It was like he was going ole. And I could not fix it. He could not fix it.
Yeah, and so I think I mean, theoretically speaking, I think you could get it back to some fundamental reflex and retrain them. But at some point, is it worth? It's a big world out there with a whole bunch of opportunities. Like, is it worth all that risk? And for every layer you go down, it's a tremendous amount of work to get you back up to just that basic level. And so,
I really want to do an iron cross. And maybe in a world, maybe I could.
Like an iron cross, like on the gymnast
on the ring
thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And maybe back in high school when the gymnastics coach had a school-wide challenge to anybody that could do an iron cross, and he had training equipment, stuff like this. Maybe if I would have cut my legs off, I could have done it. But it's not really worth it.
Right. Yeah.
So at some point, at what cost? And at what cost of the program? how far down, and this is a completely different conversation. This is what happens, folks, when Adam and I talk. It goes completely different ways than we imagine that it's going to go.
Well, no, but I do think it's relevant because organizing skill acquisition in this format, it's easy to explain to someone why you're cutting them from the track team. You know, like you can say, listen, it's going to take you 6 years to following this development. From my experience, it's going to take you about 6 years to develop. You're on the track team for 4 years. Yeah. You're talented in other ways. Go do something where you're going to get the maximum benefits for your talents.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and I think responsible coaches are, you know, at least for me as a teacher and a coach, I'm always on the student's team or the athlete's team. I'm there for them first and foremost. And sometimes the best thing to do for an athlete or a student is say, like, yeah, you should probably go someplace else.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's okay.
Yeah,
but all right, so this slide just shows so the athlete couldn't get one skill, and so we went backwards. We like had some even more fundamental skills, and I wrote in what prompted this is we have a common friend named Koji Murafushi, who's developing some exercise testing, and he's been nice enough to have my class play around with this exercise testing. And so I ended up putting together this PowerPoint thing just to try to make sense of why this exercise testing would be relevant to injury prevention. I just wanted a picture for how this would work. So by breaking things down to fundamental skills makes it easier to learn more complex skills. And sometimes you have to go backwards before you can move up. I think that's. Now, here's another scenario that I think that I see with coaches a lot too, where, and we kind of touched on this earlier, where athletes do a whole bunch of work. I call this the CrossFit model of athletic development, where you do like a whole bunch of basic exercises, and you get this really wide base of an athletic pyramid. But those skills aren't necessarily linked up together in a way that's going to give you good performance. And so you end up with this really wide base, they're not linked up, and it's a pretty small performance, which can get really frustrating for athletes because they end up doing a tremendous amount of work and spend a lot of time training, but they're just not getting the performances that they should be getting by doing all that work. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah,
so talk a little bit more about why they can't hook up. Why they can't.
Well, so okay. Let me give a basic example. Let's say we have a sprinter, and he wants to become a faster sprinter. And actually, this example was given with the last guest speaker. And so to become a faster sprinter, he tries to increase his bench. He tries to bench press more weight, right? And so that takes effort and time out of training to be bench pressing. The athlete does what he's supposed to, right? He's dedicated, he puts in the time, his bench press gets better. It just isn't, all that work you put in bench pressing isn't going to help him necessarily sprint any faster. Does that make sense? And so that's what I mean, like those exercises aren't linked up to the end goal, the end performance. They're just kind of random exercises or random skills that don't necessarily make a faster sprinter or a better hammer thrower or shot putter.
Yeah. So that's a confusion to me with this graphic. Is these things do make sense. If I'm going to
gotcha. That's what you're saying.
It's like instead of step at 180, maybe squat 100 more pounds.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah,
you know what I mean, because that is a really, you inadvertently maybe put them exactly where they need to be.
Yeah, I wrote cognitive exercise. Well, here's an example of I put, like, if you get to the nuance of the winds, right? Before the athlete can do heel turns. Is that real? I mean, they might be really good at the winds. It's not going to make them they're not going to get a better throw. They're not going to better
Eventually
performance.
they will, but it won't directly. It'll be a little square off to the side for a minute. You're
For a
right.
little
You're
bit. Yeah.
exactly right.
And
But
so,
it needs to be there ultimately.
yeah. And so I guess my point is, we probably shouldn't, as coaches, we shouldn't plan for the future too long, right? Because athletes get
Certainly not.
frustrated. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly not college coaches.
Yeah. And high school coaches, 3 months is forever for a high school kid.
Yeah,
That's a significant percentage of their lifetime. And so, you got to coach them in a way where they're going to perform within weeks.
yeah,
And so if you're
yeah,
focusing on the minutia of these technical details, that are going to help them down the road a year or two, maybe that's not the best thing to do. You're building
yeah,
a really broad base of a pyramid, even if it's really great stuff.
yeah.
Um, it just go for it. Yeah.
Another way to look at it maybe is with these graphics, it kind of feels like, and it's kind of what you said there, it feels like once you get one of these squares, it's a fully formed skill and you can do it every time. And there's two things. So maybe you only kind of get the heel turn. So the square isn't really square, it's like a flat rectangle.
Yeah.
So it doesn't push and some of these things are more important than others. So strictly speaking, they're not all the same size square, blah, 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 blah. But so maybe you don't abandon all of, maybe you do have partial learning in some of these squares, and it doesn't add a tremendous amount, but maybe it adds a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you need enough learning to be able to. And so, by a fully formed skill, I guess we could define it as: do you know the skill well enough for it to link up to make a more complex skill?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there could be different qualities of that skill, right? So maybe you do
Right.
a pretty bad heel turn in this case, but it's still enough to link up to develop a new skill, and that heel turn is going to get better with practice.
Yeah.
Maybe. And I think what this does is just, even though all of these exercises are good, these are all skills that you and I recognize as being very important to throwing the hammer, there's a time and place for all of them, or at least to be optimally organized. You wouldn't necessarily want to do them all at the same time or just do them in willy-nilly order. You want to put them in the order that's going to be the most the most optimal for developing performance. I guess that's what I'm getting at with this slide.
Yeah. And that sometimes depends on the athlete too.
Well, totally right. Yeah, absolutely.
Some people have an innate rhythm, and so they can learn the wind. They've got the wind first time out of the chute, and some people threw a discus for 10 years before they started throwing the hammer, and it took them 18 more years to learn a rhythmic wind before he threw a silver medal. So,
that's an oddly specific example. It's almost like you have somebody in mind.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So here, here's the downside of doing that. Even though let's say you got a coach, he knows what he's supposed to be doing, or she knows what they're supposed to be doing. They got all the right drills, but it's organized in the wrong way. The desires of the athletes and the coaches to get performances, they're still going to go back to, let's just throw it hard and fast to get some performances. Right. And we're right back to the same problem of we have a functionally narrow pyramid. Even though it's got this really big base, it's really functionally narrow and unstable, and we're cruising for an injury. And so the advantage, what I like about this model is it would give coaches kind of a guide for what exercise or what skill you would get first, second, third, fourth, and so you can lay out an exercise training program chronologically, because as humans we don't experience things in a pyramid like this. We experience things one after the other after the other after the other, and so you'd have to lay out the exercises in a linear format for
Yeah.
athletes to develop, which I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Talk about, before you get to Koji awareness, and because we're talking about growing this pyramid, you said something to me about the area of the pyramid growing logarithmically.
Yeah, yeah. And so assuming that in order to get this performance, you have to incorporate all the skills in the pyramid. So this pyramid has what, 10 blocks in it. And so you would have to, all these 10 blocks of skills would have to be incorporated to get this performance.
Mhm.
If you want to improve your performance, you would have to still perform all these 10 blocks of skills, but you'd also have to add another whole row of blocks onto this, which would be 5 blocks to get one more block of improvement. And so now the area is 15 blocks for 5 blocks of performance. And so if you graph that out, the area is going to grow much faster than the height of the pyramid. So if we're graphing performance based on the area of the pyramid, it would grow logarithmically, right?
Yeah.
As you get further along your skill development, to get one more unit of performance would take a tremendous amount of work. And I think that's what we see. That's a natural phenomenon that happens in athletics. As you get better and better, it's harder to improve. The margin of improvement just takes so much work.
And at the same time, and this has nothing to do with any of this other than it's about performance. One of my go-tos when I was getting stressed in a competition was I would force myself to go back and think about the volume of training that I'd done that year. And it's like, I've thrown 10,000 throws.
Yeah.
I can't not succeed. The base of my pyramid is so huge that I have to succeed. And so in doing it this way, as opposed to stacking them, just getting strong and fast, gives you a much better mental state as well.
Yeah.
Because it has more integrity.
Yeah. Oh, I skipped a point, kind of building up that a little bit. I skipped a point where I said, like, if certain athletes can't do certain skills and you have to go back and find the simpler skills, maybe they shouldn't be at the University of Oregon track team. From coaching at smaller colleges, it's definitely worth it at Pacific University or a Division III school to go back and do those basic skills, because the level of competition isn't the University of Oregon. It's a much different level of competition. You could win conference championships every year in the hammer throw by just focusing on just a few, building pretty modest pyramids. And so it is probably worth breaking it down, I think, just because you can outcompete people at that level.
Okay, here's another way to look at it, and I don't know if it makes any sense, and this maybe is a conversation off screen, but it occurs to me. So one of the things that I say a lot is in throwing the hammer, you have to do 2 or 3 things right, and there's 10 different ways to do them each. So there's a million ways to throw the hammer for. What it makes me want to think about is those three things being the top three squares of the pyramid, and how all the other stuff pushes those up, right? So I started out with a whole bunch of squares on the bottom because I had a lot of athletic experience. And I'm just naturally gifted. I could do the heel turn without learning it. Just, oh, okay. Stuff like that. But it always came back to, you got to use the ball, you got to stay level, and that's about it. Like, you have to use a pendulum. Yeah, you have to use a pendulum, and it's time, posture, and timing. Right, you have to stay in the right position in the throw, and you have to dance with the ball. So can you see where I'm going? Because I'm losing my track a little bit.
Sure. And so I think, yeah. And so I think what you described is, you described like, if you're looking at the peak of the pyramid of like top performance, like what does it take to get top performance? You went a level or maybe two down, like what you're saying, and said, okay, we can break top performance into these three criteria, which could be valid. Like, I don't know if it's 2 skills that make a complex skill. Maybe it's a dozen skills that make a more complex skill. So I just use 2 because it's the simplest. But so I think you went a row down. Now, I think if you're talking to like really gifted athletes, that might be all they need. And you can say, oh, do these 3 things. Like, I get it now. Or that gives you categories to start breaking that stuff down. Okay, these more simple exercises are how I can learn how to use the ball. And these simple exercises are how I could do those other things you're saying. I don't know, I tuned out there for a little bit. I didn't really tune out. But so what were they again? It was use the ball.
Just use the ball, just posture and timing.
Posture and timing,
so
and
yeah,
pendulum.
Yeah. Feel the pendulum and stay level.
Really. Sure. And so so you could keep breaking those things down into simpler and simpler skills until you get down to like a really, really basic level. And so I think that's where.
Can you go back to your screen that actually shows the skills that you have listed, just so I can think about it?
Sure.
Yeah, there you go.
And like I said, these ones I just kind of put in. This is at like 1 a.m. and
right.
Just
that's when the magic happens. So the reason that came to my mind was, you started talking about more and more complex or more and more movements to reach this complex movement, and it can be intimidating. It's like how, and the old thing that he used to say, that Stewart used to say all the time, if you analyze, you paralyze. And so if you think about too much stuff, then you can't move at all. And I'm just trying to figure, and it's nothing about, this is fantastic stuff. And it's just the way it's stacking. I don't know.
So I don't think so I've thought of like, since I've written this out, I've thought of like 10 contradictions that I can think of. But what's that?
That's the hammer, but okay.
Yeah. And this is where I've kind of settled on this. I think this model is good at showing about 3 or 4 different conclusions that we can draw from it. Right. But it's not going to show you everything. It's just too much of a zoomed out, blurry view.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what makes the connections. There's a whole bunch of here that I don't know, but I do think this model holds true for a few different principles. And simplifies understanding why you would do one exercise first and then another exercise. I think it does help with that, and it does explain why functional movement testing and testing people's ability to perform simple exercises, why that would be a predictor of injury, or they're negatively correlated with injury.
No, I'm totally jumping the queue with all that. All of this stuff makes complete sense, and I think it's really good.
But I also do think I probably have a really interesting perspective. Not to toot my own horn here, but I was such a bad athlete training with such amazing athletes. Like I have a really weird perspective on this. I mean, my James Parker, I think he was a 60-foot shot putter in college. I think.
Yeah, he was 60, 200
in the disc.
Shot and close to 200 in the discus.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I was so much worse than anybody else I trained with, that it gives me a perspective. And I think that's how that's why I like thinking about how far back on the basics can I go? Because I think, and you brought this up with like algebra. Some people need to, given an algebra equation, they need to go through every step, line by line, to get to the answer. And some people can just look at an algebra equation and goes, oh yeah, that's X is 42.
Obvious to the most casual observer.
Right. And so, yes. And so athletically, I am that type of person probably that just had to work through it line by line by line by line. And I had to, and I didn't know what I was doing at the time. And I had a coach who I think appreciated the ability of going back to basics like that. And so I think I was just constantly just going back to basics all the time, trying to keep up with you guys.
Yeah, and the other part of it is, and I mentioned a little bit before, and it doesn't, you don't need to, it wouldn't hold, it doesn't need to hold true in this atmosphere. But it's like John Smith says. John Smith, he's coached a lot of really, really good throwers, and he's a big strength guy. He's really good at getting people strong. And so he told me once, he was coaching a guy named Dan Taylor, who was a mountain. He was probably 6'4", 5", weighed 300, 320. And he was the strongest shot putter in the country at the time. And what he told me is, what do you do with, if you get an athlete, what do you do if you get a V10? An athlete that's got a V10 under the hood. And I go, I don't know what. And he goes, turbocharge it. So he's a firm believer in capitalizing on your strengths, and for him, literally. But my point is, and you said it, so I had some gigantic block of stuff in your pyramid from the get-go, just because I could throw, and James Parker the same way. I'm really good at throwing heavy stuff far. And that's one of my basics. And maybe you can really, once you get, if you fine tune this thing, then maybe you can talk about which of the squares, once perfected, are bigger than the others. Which ones are more important? Is it more important to do a heel turn? Is it more important to have rhythm?
Yeah, I don't know.
And I don't know how you could do that, but it's an interesting, to me, it's an interesting question.
And another way to look at that is maybe your individual blocks are bigger than my individual blocks.
Right.
And so if you think about it like that, really what this pyramid is predicting is the optimal way of organizing training and how to organize training to minimize the risk of injury. Right. Yeah. And so it doesn't matter if your blocks are bigger than mine, you're going to get better performances for less skills, but you still want to organize training in a way where you get an equilateral pyramid, essentially, to reduce injury for you. I would have to do the same for me to reduce injury for me too. I'm just not going to throw as far as you because I got smaller blocks.
That's a great, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if that works. And no, I got your thing saying that you have to go here at 3, so we're running out of time here. And and that's totally fine. Do we bother getting into Koji awareness stuff?
I think that stuff is, I leaf through it, and I actually did see some of that stuff he posted on Instagram or Facebook or something,
Yeah.
some of that. So it was a little bit familiar to me. If you want your students to kind of incorporate that into their thinking, it's pretty, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, so how, it's like the president fitness test, only a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
I
do
mean,
you do? What do you need to work on?
right. And you know what? We'll probably just, but maybe I'll invite Koji on, and we could talk about this. And I'll share this video with him. So kind of set up a foundation to see if this is a valid way of thinking about Koji awareness. That's a good idea.
Yeah, but as a way to I get, and this is, if you think about our conversations, this is the way they go. I tend to point toward performance, because I was the guy that just threw as hard as he could every single throw of every single day. And you were always about the process, because you did everything every single time. You did the warm up, all of the warm up every single day.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between your performance and my performance, like huge, like it's a tremendously big difference. But what's interesting is I definitely was a subpar athlete for Division I standards, by Division I standards, but I still ended up being an All-American.
Yeah, not by All-American standards, maybe not Division I standards. What was your best throw?
And they had 223, something like that, 68 meters.
What was it? 68.
Something like that.
So, all right, 83%. You got to be
of yours. Yeah, that's a big difference.
Of the American record.
Yeah, I mean
that's a solid big.
Yeah, except those percents get really hard there towards the end. But no, I mean, I think I'm still number 7 or something all time at Oregon. And this is thinking, like, I was a 52 foot shot putter in high school. I mean, there's 6 kids a year in Oregon throwing further than 52 feet at the state meet.
Right.
I mean, I wasn't, like, just athletically, it's not like I had anything terribly special. And so, like, training like this, you might get someone with poor athletic ability, but they could still be an All-American or
right.
Go to conference or that sort of stuff.
Did you ever miss a meet for an injury?
No, I never missed a practice because of an injury.
What?
I never missed a day of practice because of being injured.
There you go. See, there's the proof in the pudding.
Well, it's anecdotal though too, but I mean, I don't think as a training group we weren't injured. You dealt with some injuries, but again, you're dealing with quite a few with a lot more force than I was dealing with.
Yeah, and a different history.
Yeah,
I was hurt when I got here. I got more healthy once I got here.
Yeah. Lance, thanks as always for coming on.
Sorry, I gotta go. I had a failed winch at Sacramento State. The cage won't go up. I got a overnight ship a winch to Sacramento.
Oh, we've all been there. Yeah, it's fine. With that, everybody experiences that at some point. All right, I'm done recording.
My other life.